Okay, picture this, an empire so massive, so unbelievably huge, it literally stretched from the freezing plains of Eastern Europe all the way to the sunny shores of the Pacific Ocean. We're talking half the known world, folks. One single, unstoppable force. Sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, right? But this was real. This was the Mongol Empire. And then, poof! Almost overnight, it was gone. Vanished. Like your motivation on a Monday morning. How does something that colossal just blink out of existence? That's the paradox we're diving into. Before we get to the poof, let's rewind a bit. This whole story starts with a guy named Temujin. Born in a place that probably didn't even have a Starbucks, he grew up in pretty harsh conditions. No silver spoon, just, like, a rusty iron spork. But Temujin had a vision, a knack for uniting warring nomadic tribes, and seriously, a lot of friends with horses. He wasn't just a leader, he was a master strategist, a ruthless negotiator, and eventually, the one and only Genghis Khan. Pretty good glow up for a guy from the steppes, huh? Genghis Khan didn't just conquer, he practically invented the concept of rapid expansion. His cavalry moved like a furious, horseback-riding tornado across Asia. We're talking thousands of miles in unbelievably short periods. Forget your Amazon Prime delivery, these guys had same-day conquest. They took out empires that had stood for centuries with astonishing speed and efficiency. Persia, China, parts of Russia, all just another Tuesday for the Mongol horde. Their military machine was so far ahead of its time, it's almost unfair. Nobody saw them coming, or if they did, it was usually too late. Let's put this into perspective. At its peak, the Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan's successors, covered about 24 million square kilometers. That's larger than the entire continent of Africa. Or, if you prefer, it's roughly the size of the moon. Seriously, imagine running a country that spans basically 1/6 of Earth's landmass. The sheer logistics of it are enough to give any modern CEO a panic attack. One leader, countless cultures, a million different languages, how do you even order pizza for that many people? Spoiler, you don't. You conquer their pizza. But wait, it wasn't all just fire and fury. Believe it or not, after the initial, restructuring of territories, the Mongols ushered in a period historians call the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace. This meant safe trade routes across Asia, cultural exchange booming, and surprisingly, a lot of technological diffusion. Think about it, East met West like never before. Paper, gunpowder, printing, all these amazing innovations got a super-speed express ticket along the Silk Road. It was like a medieval internet, but with more camels and less cat videos. Okay, maybe a few cat videos. For a glorious, terrifying moment, the vast Mongol Empire was a relatively unified entity, or at least it tried to be. Communication was surprisingly efficient for the time, thanks to their famous YAM system, a pony express that put your local postal service to shame. Messages could travel hundreds of miles a day, ensuring that even in distant lands, the Khan's word was law. This centralized, albeit brutally enforced, authority meant an unprecedented period of stability across a massive chunk of the world. It was a golden age of horseback riding, really. Under Genghis Khan's son Ogidi and later, his grandson Kublai Khan, the empire reached its absolute zenith. Kublai, in particular, established the Yuan dynasty in China, ruling from a glittering capital that would eventually become Beijing. He welcomed foreign dignitaries like Marco Polo, showing off the empire's wealth and sophistication. It wasn't just about conquest anymore, it was about building, governing, and showing off. The Mongols were no longer just raiders, they were emperors. Like, we have really fancy robes now kind of emperors. The world trembled, but also, kind of admired them. From the Hungarian plains to the jungles of Vietnam, Mongol armies swept through everything. They pioneered combined arms tactics, psychological warfare, and literally weaponized dread. Opponents often surrendered at the mere sight of their banners, knowing resistance was futile and probably painful. The sheer scale of their victories is mind-boggling. They were so good, other empires just folded. Imagine winning a game of chess by just showing up with a dragon. That was basically the Mongol strategy. They really did rule the world, or at least a massive, terrifying chunk of it. Think about how diverse that empire was. You had nomadic horsemen, sophisticated Chinese scholars, Persian poets, Russian princes, and even European merchants, all living under a single, albeit iron-fisted, rule. This wasn't some homogeneous little kingdom, it was a patchwork quilt of cultures, languages, and religions, all somehow held together by sheer military might and, eventually, a fairly pragmatic approach to governance. It was a true melting pot, sometimes literally when things got too heated. The sheer audacity of controlling such a complex, sprawling entity is truly awe-inspiring. Their military was a finely tuned machine, not just because of the horses. They adopted and innovated on everything. Siege engines from China, military intelligence that would make modern spy agencies blush, and a discipline that was legendary. Every man, woman, and child in Mongol society had a role in supporting the war machine. It was total mobilization before total mobilization was cool. They even used captured engineers and artisans to build better weapons. Talk about resourcefulness. They were basically the Borg of the 13th century. Resistance is futile, we will assimilate your siege technology. Alright, so we've established it was a massive, terrifying, incredibly efficient, and surprisingly sophisticated empire. It dominated the globe for over a century, reshaping continents and connecting cultures. It literally controlled half the world. Logically, something this big, this powerful, should fade slowly, right? Over centuries, with many, many warning signs. Like a really long, drawn-out reality TV show cancellation. But nope. The Mongol Empire, as a single, unified entity, essentially poof edition. It shattered into pieces faster than a dropped smartphone screen. How? Within just a few decades of its peak, the once mighty Mongol Empire wasn't really an empire anymore. Instead, you had the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Four distinct, often squabbling, and sometimes warring entities. It was less like a united superpower and more like four cousins fighting over who gets the last slice of pizza. This wasn't a slow decline, it was a rapid, dramatic, and relatively abrupt disintegration of central authority. From one to many, in what felt like the blink of an eye. So, what happened? Well, first up, let's talk about family drama. Genghis Khan was great at conquering, but maybe not so great at setting up a clear succession plan. He divided his empire among his sons, which worked for a bit, but then you had grandsons, great-grandsons, and a whole lot of ambitious relatives all thinking they should be the next great Khan. It was like a medieval episode of Succession, but with more actual backstabbing and less private jet drama. This constant bickering over who was the legitimate heir led to serious internal strife and eventually, open warfare among the different branches of the family. The biggest crack appeared when Kublai Khan, who established the Yuan dynasty in China, claimed the title of Great Khan. Some of his cousins were not happy about that. They felt he was becoming too Chinese and abandoning the traditional Mongol ways. This wasn't just a philosophical debate, it led to decades of actual, bloody civil war between the various khanates. When your own family members are fighting each other for control, it's pretty hard to keep up the image of an unstoppable, unified force. The center just couldn't hold, no matter how many horses you had. Imagine trying to manage a pizza delivery service that covers half the planet. Even with the superfast YAM system, governing such an immense, geographically diverse empire was an absolute nightmare. Different cultures, different laws, different climates, it was just too much for a relatively small nomadic elite to handle long-term. Information took forever to travel, orders were misinterpreted, and local governors started acting like independent rulers. The empire became a victim of its own success, expanding beyond its administrative capacity. Size truly does matter, but sometimes, too much of a good thing is, well, too much. When you conquer that many different cultures, you're bound to have some clashes. The Mongols, initially tolerant, often struggled to truly integrate the diverse populations they ruled. In Persia, they adopted Islam and became Persianized. In China, they founded the Yuan dynasty, but many Chinese resented foreign rule. In Russia, the Golden Horde remained distinct, ruling from afar. This cultural assimilation, or lack thereof, meant that different parts of the empire slowly started to become more like their conquered populations and less like their Mongol overlords. It was like trying to keep oil and water mixed. Eventually, they're going to separate. Conquering half the world is awesome for bragging rights, but it's incredibly expensive. Maintaining huge armies, building infrastructure, dealing with rebellions, and just generally keeping the lights on for such a vast territory put an enormous strain on the empire's finances. The conquered territories, while rich, eventually needed governing, and that meant taxes, which often led to resentment. The Mongols weren't always the best at long-term economic planning, preferring to, just take stuff. Eventually, the bill came due, and it was a big one. As if all that wasn't enough, Mother Nature decided to throw a wrench into the whole world domination plan. Specifically, a wrench shaped like a really angry flea. The Black Death, which originated in Central Asia, absolutely ravaged the Mongol Empire. It spread like wildfire along the very trade routes the Mongols had so meticulously established, decimating populations, armies, and leadership alike. Imagine trying to keep an empire running when a third to half of your people are, not running anymore. This wasn't just a setback, it was a devastating gut punch. With the empire stretched thin, leadership squabbling, and the plague doing its worst, people started to get ideas. Ideas like, hey, maybe we don't need these foreign overlords anymore. Rebellions erupted across the empire, most famously in China. The Red Turban Rebellion, fueled by resentment against the Yuan dynasty's foreign rule and economic hardship, eventually led to the collapse of Mongol power in China and the rise of the native Ming dynasty. It's tough to rule with an iron fist when that fist is busy scratching a plague-ridden rash. Just saying. The original Mongol military was legendary, fast, disciplined, and terrifying. But over time, especially after settling down to rule vast empires, they started to lose that edge. They adopted local military styles, became less nomadic, and their famed cavalry wasn't always as effective in every terrain, like the jungles of Southeast Asia. The sons and grandsons of the great conquerors often preferred palace life to steppe warfare. It's hard to stay sharp when you're busy counting your gold and, let's be honest, probably eating too much excellent Chinese food. The warrior spirit just wasn't as fierce. As the Mongol Empire weakened, new regional powers began to emerge or re-emerge, ready to challenge the fragmented khanates. In Europe, nascent nation-states grew stronger. In Persia, various local dynasties chipped away at Ilkhanate authority. In China, the Ming dynasty was a powerful new force. These weren't the easy targets the early Mongols encountered, they were hardened by years of Mongol rule and now had a clear enemy to rally against. The geopolitical landscape was shifting, and the Mongols were no longer the undisputed big dog on the block. More like a very large, but very tired, dog. And here's a fun one that not many people talk about: climate change. Well, not modern, human-caused climate change, but natural shifts. Some historians argue that a period of severe droughts in Mongolia and changes in steppe ecology might have contributed to the Mongols' initial expansion, pushing them out, but also potentially destabilizing their homelands later on. Less grass for horses means less horses, and less horses means less, Mongols being Mongols. While not the primary cause, it's a fascinating reminder that even the mightiest empires are sometimes at the mercy of Mother Nature's mood swings. Running separate, squabbling khanates meant they often imposed conflicting taxes and tariffs on trade, which hurt the very Silk Road commerce that had thrived during the Pax Mongolica. The unified economic benefits dissolved into protectionist policies. Plus, the Yuan dynasty in China started printing way too much paper money, leading to rampant inflation and economic chaos. Just like your local government, but with more silk and fewer parking tickets. When the economy tanks, people get mad, and mad people eventually get pitchforks. Not good for empire stability. Let's be real, not everyone can be a Genghis Khan. The initial generation of leaders was exceptionally brilliant, ruthless, and driven. But over generations, the quality of leadership diluted. Later Khans often lacked the strategic genius, military prowess, or unifying charisma of their ancestors. They became more concerned with internal court intrigues and luxurious living than with the grand vision of empire. It's like a band, the first album is a masterpiece, the later ones, not so much. Great empires need great leaders, and eventually, the Mongol bloodline ran a little thin on greatness. Beyond the formal split into khanates, these successor states were constantly at each other's throats. The Golden Horde fought the Ilkhanate, who fought the Chagatai, who probably just wanted everyone to chill out and share some kumis. These weren't just border skirmishes, these were full-blown wars, draining resources, and weakening all factions. When you're busy fighting your own family, you don't have a lot of energy left to keep other people in line. It's like a sibling rivalry that accidentally destabilizes a continent. Oops. The Yuan dynasty's rule in China was always precarious. The Chinese population greatly outnumbered the Mongols, and there was persistent cultural and ethnic tension. The Mongols struggled to fully assimilate or gain the genuine loyalty of the Han Chinese majority. Their policies, like maintaining a separate social hierarchy, only exacerbated resentment. It was a bit like trying to run a country where everyone hates you, and there are, 100 times more of them than there are of you. Eventually, the numbers just didn't add up, and the people said nope. Even the Golden Horde, which lasted the longest as a distinct entity, eventually faced its downfall. Fragmented into smaller khanates, weakened by internal feuds and diseases, they were slowly pushed back by the rising power of Muscovy, Proto-Russia. The Battle of Kulikovo in 1380, though not immediately fatal, was a symbolic turning point, proving the Mongols were no longer invincible. By the late 15th century, the Tatar yoke was finally broken, ushering in a unified Russian state. Turns out, even the coolest bands eventually run out of steam. Over in Persia, the Ilkhanate met a similar, if more complicated, fate. After a period of embracing Persian culture and Islam, internal strife and a lack of clear succession plunged them into civil war and fragmentation. Various local dynasties, like the Jalayirids and the Khobanids, carved up their territory. The Ilkhanate essentially dissolved in the mid-14th century, breaking into several smaller, short-lived states. It was like a giant Lego castle that slowly lost all its foundational pieces until it was just a pile of colorful bricks. Sad. The Chagatai Khanate, nestled in Central Asia, suffered from constant internal conflicts, often religious in nature, between settled, Islamicized Mongols and traditional nomadic elements. This led to a prolonged period of instability and eventually, a split into two distinct parts, the Western Chagatai Khanate and the Eastern Mogulistan. They were like a married couple who just couldn't agree on whether to embrace city life or keep their yurt in the wilderness. Spoiler, neither worked out perfectly, and they both ended up as footnotes in history, eventually absorbed by other powers. The final nail in the Yuan dynasty's coffin came from the Chinese, spearheaded by Zhu Yuanzhang, a former peasant and Buddhist monk who led the Red Turban Rebellion. He united various rebel factions, launched a massive offensive, and in 1368, captured Dadu, Beijing, driving the Mongols back to their homeland. This wasn't just a win, it was a triumphant reclaiming of China by a native dynasty, the Ming. From world conquerors to please stop bothering us, the Mongols' rapid exit from China truly marked the end of their unified imperial ambitions. Talk about a dramatic exit. So, when we say vanished almost overnight, it's obviously a bit of hyperbole. No empire actually disappears in a single night unless aliens are involved. But compared to the slow, agonizing decline of other great empires that took centuries to crumble, the Mongol Empire's rapid disintegration, from a unified superpower to four squabbling states, then further fragmented, within a few decades, certainly felt overnight to contemporaries. It was a whiplash-inducing collapse that left a power vacuum across Eurasia. A true historical jump scare, if you will. What remained of the Mongol Empire after its grand collapse? Well, the successor Khanates continued to rule their regional territories for centuries, albeit with diminishing power and influence. The Golden Horde's legacy continued to shape Russian history for hundreds of years. The Yuan dynasty's impact on China, both positive and negative, was profound. And the cultural mixing fostered during the Pax Mongolica left an indelible mark on art, science, and trade across Eurasia. So, while the unified empire vanished, its ghosts lingered, shaping the world in unexpected ways. Spooky, but productive ghosts. Interestingly, a sort of second coming of Mongol power briefly emerged in the late 14th century with Timur, or Tamerlane. He was a Turco-Mongol conqueror who modeled himself after Genghis Khan, leading devastating campaigns across Central Asia, Persia, and parts of India and the Middle East. He even crushed the Golden Horde and challenged the Ottoman Empire. For a moment, it seemed like the glory days were back. But Timur's empire was personal and fell apart quickly after his death, proving that the era of a truly unified, transcontinental Mongol dominion was well and truly over. One-hit wonder, basically. The Mongol Empire's collapse shattered the myth of invincibility that had surrounded them for over a century. It showed that even the most formidable military machines and the most expansive empires were ultimately subject to the same pressures: internal squabbles, economic woes, external pressures, and, fleas carrying a deadly plague. No matter how many horses you have, or how good you are at archery, if your administrative structure crumbles and your population gets wiped out by disease, you're in trouble. It's a harsh but valuable lesson in imperial mortality. In a weird way, the Mongol Empire's rise and fall became a cautionary tale and a blueprint for future empires. Conquer quickly? Check. Rule with an iron fist? Check. Foster trade? Check. But also, beware of succession crises, overextension, cultural resistance, and the unexpected curveballs of history. Other empires, from the Ottomans to the British, undoubtedly learned lessons from the Mongols' rapid rise and equally rapid, if fragmented, disintegration. It's a testament to how even when you're literally on top of the world, there's always a slippery slope waiting. Even with all these explanations, the sheer speed of the Mongol Empire's fragmentation remains a fascinating historical anomaly. It defies the typical narrative of slow decay for vast empires. It's a reminder that history isn't always linear, and sometimes, even the most dominant forces can unravel with astonishing speed when multiple weaknesses converge. It's a dramatic, epic story that continues to captivate, making us wonder, if something that powerful can vanish so quickly, what does that say about everything else? Let's not forget how deeply the Golden Horde's rule impacted Russia. While often seen as a period of subjugation, it inadvertently fostered the rise of Muscovy as the dominant Russian principality, as Moscow became the primary tax collector for the Mongols. This led to the centralization of power that eventually formed the basis of the Russian state. So, ironically, the foreign conquerors laid some of the groundwork for a unified Russia. It's like accidentally building your enemy's superpower, while trying to, just collect taxes. Whoops! Despite the violence, the Pax Mongolica genuinely facilitated an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West. Paper money, printing, gunpowder, compasses, these vital innovations traveled the Silk Road, accelerating global development. Europe, still recovering from its own dark ages, reaped enormous benefits. So, while the empire itself collapsed, its transient unity paved the way for a more connected world and the Renaissance. Think of it as a really brutal, but ultimately beneficial, global delivery service. From a small band of nomadic horsemen to rulers of half the known world, and then to a series of regional powers, the Mongol journey is one of history's most dramatic sagas. It reminds us that even the most formidable empires are built on shifting sands, susceptible to internal divisions, external pressures, and the unpredictable forces of nature and disease. The Mongol Empire may have vanished, but its story, its impact, and its incredible paradox continue to echo through the corridors of time. And hey, at least they left us with cool yurts and a whole lot of history to dissect. So there you have it. The empire that ruled half the known world, seemingly invincible, vanished not with a whimper, but with a dramatic series of bangs, squabbles, and plagues, all within a shockingly short time frame. It's a powerful lesson that even overwhelming military might isn't enough to sustain an empire forever, especially one built on such rapid expansion. The Mongol Empire's story isn't just about what they conquered, but how quickly their incredible dominion fractured. Next time you think something is too big to fail, just remember the Mongols. They probably thought that too. Thanks for watching.